Well, well, well. Oh, I tell you what, we had an awesome parent group last night, and I kind of hit them hard with a little something that I've spoken about before, but it's a major theme in life that everybody should know about, especially parents. But everybody should know about this one. Now, I've done a video earlier probably a couple years ago that had to do with anxiety, trauma, I think it was, um, what we called trauma vows, and entitlement. Long title to that, but that is definitely worth a view if you're a student of truth, if you really seek some knowledge here to kind of free yourself. And I have yet to tell you what I hit him with last night, but is close to that. I wanted to really zero in on this thing that I used to call, let me say that, and I'm going to start making some changes to some of the titles and things that I've created and articles that I've written and videos I've done. I used to focus on this thing called trauma vows, but I have dug deeper and have had more and more insights, and I want to call them trauma promises. Or I'll maybe create a title of an article or whatever and say trauma promises and vows. Okay? Because why? Because there is a huge difference between a vow and a promise. All right? So, trauma vows, okay? Trauma promises. Let me say it that way. Trauma promises. That's the new title of everything. That's the dynamic. Trauma promises. You've probably never heard about this before. That has always been a commitment of mine in the groups that I've run, especially, but just in my life, right? I mean, everybody wants to make a difference with the folks that we work with, in our communities and things. And my commitment has always been to push the edge a bit, to go a little deeper into some of the things uh, that we are plagued with, if I could say that, pieces of the human journey that seem to be challenging for us. Excuse me. So hang on to your hats here, okay? Trauma promises. Now, I know that kind of sounds pretty hard hitting, uh, but what I wanted to do, this is an insight that I had over the last while, is that I really needed to kind of let folks know that this is really, really, really normal, right? So let me share with you a little thing that I came up with to help people realize, that this is something very normal and very unique to human beings. Okay. So I posted this up for folks to take a look at. Have a look at it. I'll read this to you here. And can you think of a time when you made a personal promise? Maybe a promise born out of your caring. Can you think of a promise you made to your child or to a loved one or to a family member? How about something like, I promise to be there for you, or I promise that I won't let you go? See, we make those promises all the time, right? Can you think of a time when you made a promise from frustration or anger? Could be something like, I promise that if you keep skipping school, or I promise that if you keep being disrespectful, right? Right? If I just complete the sentence. And there's all sorts of variations of these promises that we make out of our frustration or our anger. What about promises made when we feel guilty? Oh man, I promise that next time I choose a spouse, I promise the next time, that the next place we live in, I promise that the next time I drink alcohol, or I do drugs, or next time I party, or I promise that the next time you're stressed out, you know? So when we feel guilty about behavior, we make promises from there. How about a promise that we've made from fear? Oh, I promise that this will never happen again. Or I promise that next time I'll be prepared. You see, we do this all the time, folks. We make these promises, and there are all sorts of little promises to big promises, promises that are kind of fairly shallow to promises that are pretty significant. But here's a little thing that I shared with the group last night. A vow outranks a promise. A vow outranks a promise. You know this, but I'll just remind you is that anytime that we are involved in taking vows, we are involved in something serious. We are involved in something sacred. All right. Anything that of any significant importance, especially something sacred like a marriage vow or a vow of love between a parent and a child or a child to a parent, if somebody's going to make a commitment to a spiritual life, what have you, there is a vow that goes with it. Okay. So, again, this is just to point out as human beings, very unique to us, we make promises. So I hope you were able to remember maybe some promises that you've made through, through different parts of your life and times of your life. Okay. So I'm going to screen share with you another video. Hold on, just give me a second here, folks, because I'm inspired, and when I'm inspired, I get up to all sorts of things. So just give me a second. All right, and I'll wait for this video to come up, and here it is. Let me see. Okay. And I need to, come on now, don't be stubborn. Oh, it's being stubborn. Oh, jeepers. Come on now. Be nice to me. All right. You'll find it funny. You'll find it funny. I guarantee. All right. Okay, here we go. Now I need to optimize my video clip and share the sound. All right. Here we go, folks.
Children are forced to eat vegetables. Think of the children.
Joseph, do you want a cookie? You have to eat your veggies first.
Save the children from vegetables and everything else.
It is?
All you have to do is eat your noodle from your mac and cheese. Swallow.
I tell you, folks. Right? I remember bringing this topic up and showing this video a while back, and an adult woman said, I can still remember when my parents tried to force me to eat broccoli, and I made a promise to myself that someday when I have a family, guess what? I'm never going to force anybody to eat their vegetables. Oh, I tell you. But this is what happens, folks. And again, have you ever heard anybody talk about this before? Have a discussion about these promises that we make to ourselves at various moments in our life. And in that video, you can see little kids going through what is a highly disturbing experience for them. To them in their little mind and hearts, that is a traumatic experience, right? The visceral reaction that they had to having to try this food that they just didn't want to was extremely tactile, right? It was visceral, it was physical, right? To the point of them, wanting to spit up the food. So for them in that space right there, that was fairly traumatic, fairly disturbing for them to experience. So what do you think those children, what promises are those children making from having experienced that disruption, that disturbing experience? They're probably saying exactly what this woman said a while back here. I hate this. This feels terrible. First of all, first promise, I never want to experience this again. I promise myself I'm never going to experience this again. There might be a promise here. Hey, I trusted my mom or my dad to feed me and take care of me and treat me well. Now, I promise that I'll never trust these guys again. And oftentimes you'll see a promise on the other side of that says, well, if I can't trust them, then the only person I can trust is myself. But it's almost like the sentence completion is what we're going after here. Someday, when I grow up and have a family, I promise, and you complete that sentence. I can tell you folks, I see this every day in my clinical practice, every day. Parents, because I do family counseling, parents have experienced disturbing and traumatic events when they were children, and they made promises to themselves to never be hurt again because that was such a terrible experience. They never want to experience it again. Remember, that's the first promise we're going to make, because the first thing that we're concerned about is our own survival, our own comfort, not being hurt again, not being, having that very disturbing experience again, not experiencing that trauma again. So it's a defensive reaction that we have first and foremost. I promise myself that I'm never going to let that happen again. I promise that someday when I grow up and have a family, what? You see, there's a promise that is made, and the strength of that promise is equal, if you will, to the strength of whatever was disturbing. And so that's what I was saying. You'll have some promises are fairly shallow and they don't have a lot of energy attached to them. Other promises have a lot of energy attached to them, depending on the intensity of the trauma, right? On the intensity of that trauma is going to, I guess you could say, activate an equal intensity around a preoccupation with self-preservation. A preoccupation with self-preservation. That makes sense, doesn't it? When we feel hurt and traumatized, we don't want that to happen again. So high on our priority list, number one, numero uno, is our self-preservation, our survival. Okay. So I'm going to make a promise to myself. So I'm going to keep this video shorter because this is a long conversation and worth it, because it is a nasty, nasty, nasty dynamic that parents and other people find themselves in. And as I said, I hear it all the time, almost daily in my clinical practice. Parents will say, here's a perfect example. I try to set boundaries. I really do. I try to set boundaries. I know it's what I need to do, but when my son or daughter comes to me and they're in tears and they're unhappy that I've set this boundary that they can't play video games, or they can't use their cell phone, or they can't use the car, or they have to get up and go to bed, or go to bed on time and get up and go to school on time. When I start to set these boundaries and they start to be upset because of those boundaries, then I give in. Well, why do you give in? I'll ask a parent, well, you know that maintaining those boundaries is in the best interest of your children, correct? That's, how they need some discipline and some structure, um, and also to experience consequences when they cross those boundaries. But what you're telling me is that when your son or daughter crosses those boundaries, they never experience any consequences. And that, yeah, I know I'm a pushover. I know, things like this. Now, let me just say real quick that there's the other side of the coin, which is super rigid boundaries. And oftentimes parents set up in bipolar positions, what I call a bipolar position, good cop, bad cop. One parent is going to be very permissive around the boundaries, and one parent is going to be very overly strict. But sometimes I find, even if it's the strict parents too, they go, I've had enough. I've had enough. I'm not going to put up with this anymore. I'm going to establish a boundary. But then when their child comes to them with those big sad eyes and a few tears, or starts to throw a fit, boy, they crumble. They just don't maintain the boundaries. Say, well, why is this? Let's look a little bit more into this. And so what I often find is that parents will say, well, when I grew up, I had a really strict parent. My parents were super strict. Oh, so you made a promise to yourself, I'll say. What's the promise to you? What promise did you make? That someday when you grow up and have a family, what? Well, I'm never going to treat my children like that. I'm never going to be strict. I'm, going to make sure that they feel happy and that they feel cared about. And so there's this storyline that the parent comes up with that says, I just want my kids to be happy. I just want everybody to be happy, feel cared for, feel loved. I'll say, well, you know, it's really interesting right now because the reason why you're here, as you've described it, is that nobody feels happy, nobody feels loved, and nobody feels cared for. Even you, even you don't feel loved or cared for. And the parent will often say this. You hear parents say this a lot. Something like, I have sacrificed so much for my child. I do everything for them. I have just done everything in my power to to give them a good life, and they just don't appreciate it. They just don't appreciate it. They have such a sense of entitlement. They just don't appreciate it. I don't doubt that your son or daughter doesn't appreciate what you do and that they do have an inflated sense of entitlement. But I am curious though, right? Your plan was for everybody to feel happy, cared for, and loved, and nobody feels that way. How could that end up that way? A plus B isn't equaling C, right? Well, I work so hard. I work so hard and I work so hard. Ah, okay. Well, here's the deal. You made a promise to yourself way back when you were a kid that someday you never wanted to be like your parent. You never wanted to parent like they parented. You never wanted to be the kind of parent they were, which was strict and demanding, et cetera, et cetera. You made a promise that you were going to do the opposite. I've had parents say those exact words to me. It's like when I ask them about their parenting style, their disciplinary style, they'll say, I just do the opposite of how I was raised. Well, why would you do that? Well, because let me tell you my story. You know, I had an absentee parent. I had a parent who my parents were divorced, and you know, I was raised uh, by extended family or friends of the family. Everybody's got a story to tell, and everybody, you know, experiences some sort of a betrayal or a deep disappointment, something traumatic, and out of that trauma, they make a promise to themselves. Someday, when I grow up to have a family, nobody's ever going to feel the way I felt, or you know, I'm going to give my kids. I've had parents say this directly. I am hell bent towards my mission is to give my kids the things that I never got. Okay, so the problem here's the source of the problem, right here. So you made a promise to yourself a long time ago, and no promise is good unless you have a plan. Right? You're on a mission. You're on a mission to do what? To lead everybody to the promised land, right? Where the promised land, everybody's happy, everybody feels cared for, everybody feels listened to, everybody feels loved. Boy, what a vision that is. I mean, if I was to say to you folks, hey, everybody, how about this? Here's the promised land for you, right? Everybody's going to be happy, cared for, you feel listened to, everybody will feel loved. Who's up? Who's up for that journey? Of course, you'd raise your hand, go, good idea, John. Let's go. But, okay, here we go. There's a few subjects that I have to announce to you, if you will. Subject to our journey, right? Subject to the promised land. There's some things that I need to tell you that maybe I should have told you earlier, but I didn't. So here's what I need to tell you. In order to reach the promised land, I have a plan. And I have taken the liberty of writing a script for everybody. So here, everybody, here's your scripts, here's your roles. So as long as you follow those scripts, all the ways you're supposed to be and talk and behave and all that kind of stuff, I've just written that out for you. Here's your script. As long as everybody stays within your role, stays within that script that I've written, we'll reach the promised land, right? I've got a great plan. I've got some great ideas and some great strategies. And a role for you too, and a script for you to follow. You just stay in that script and we'll all reach the promised land. Oh, well, I don't know, you know, you kind of go, oh, all right, you know, I kind of like the idea of a promised land, but I'm not quite, there's something off about this script thing, but what the heck, you know, don't have much of a choice. I'm just a kid, or, you know, I'll follow along, right? So here's the problem. You know, a lot of times parents don't get a lot of aren't in a lot of conflict or tension with their kids between the ages of 0 and about 9, 10. Almost 100% of parents that I work with who have teenagers that they're dealing with say, you know, when it hit the fan, when they were about 11, 12, 13, they often say it's about the time they went to high school. Say, but that's often about the time puberty hits. So pre-puberty, puberty hits. That's what happens. And they often will say something like, man, can't we just go back to that time when they were just so easy to deal with, where I could just hug them and we could have these nice talks. And you see, here's the script. See, that's what mom or dad thinks means promised land. So as long as we can have these nice talks and we can be lovey-dovey and we can do this and that, is because that's the idea that I have, right, guys? That's where we're headed, and these are the scripts that I've written for you. So as long as you stay within those scripts, everything's okay. And then puberty hits. Now, if these scripts are really super rigid, kids can start rebelling, I guess you could say, against those very early in life. So even before puberty hits. But just naturally around puberty, that's when it starts to hit the fan. Why? Well, because these scripts become suffocating to an individual. So imagine that I experienced a traumatic event in my life. I never want to experience that again. I've written up a plan so I don't have to experience that again. And I'm engaged in family, so I have a plan for everybody in the family. As long as everybody follows my scripts, everything will work out well. The problem is that I'm dealing with human beings, unique human beings who have their own mind, who have their own heart, who have their own spirit. And plus, as a parent, aren't I really engaged? Isn't it my heart's desire to have my kids grow up to become their own man or their own woman, to become an authentic and unique individual, to express their own unique talents and capacities in the world? Absolutely. That's called individuation. We all yearn for it, to become our own person. And every parent in their heart has that desire. And yet, that reality, if you will, that force of individuation can come into direct conflict with the scripts and roles that I've assigned everybody. So now I've assigned you a script or a role on how to be in the world, how to behave, how to think, how to talk, etc. Now all of a sudden you're starting to become your own person. This desire to become your own person, to exercise free will thought and to exercise free will choices and to experience consequences start to come to fore. Guess what that's going to create in me? It's going to create anxiety. Because remember, I said we could all reach the promised land if you stayed within the script. Now you're starting to go outside the bounds of the script, and that is when I get triggered as a parent. That's when I start to freak out. That's when my anxiety starts to go through the roof. Now remember, the degree of my getting triggered, my anxiety, my reaction to that is going to be completely influenced by the trauma that I experienced. So if it was a significant trauma, my reaction to that is going to be significant. So one could say the greater the trauma, or at least the greater the perceived trauma, the more committed, right, to that the parent is going to be to their plan being realized. So any movement by any person outside of the script triggers anxiety, a feeling of being out of control, amongst other negative feelings. So a parent this is all subconscious to the parent that this is going on. Now all of a sudden they're starting to get triggered. They're starting to become emotionally reactive. They're feeling they're feeling a lot of discomfort because now they're being triggered by the events of the past. And now they start to take it out on the children or their spouse or whoever. And they conduct themselves in ways that tend to want to force that person back into the role. So that could be anything from using guilt, nagging. It could even be being physically aggressive, threatening abandonment. If you don't do what I tell you, I'm leaving. Or if you don't do what I tell you, you can leave. All sorts of different kinds of intimidation and control kind of tactics will be used against their own flesh and blood, if you will, their own family members, against the people they say they love. And the more they do that, the more they clamp down, the more they become intimidating and controlling, what happens? The more the family members resent them for what they're doing. Now, this is a very difficult dynamic to kind of pry the lid open on, because the person who's doing it, in this case, the parent, is telling everybody that, hey, this is all about me helping everybody else reach the promised land. And I'm working my ass off to do that. This is when parents say, I have sacrificed everything. I just do so much for my family and nobody appreciates what I'm doing. Well, nobody appreciates what that parent is doing because subconsciously, right? They're trying to push their own agenda. Now, what is the agenda? Is the agenda really about the promised land? Is the agenda really about reaching this place where everybody feels loved and happy and cared for and listened to? No. The real agenda came out of the trauma, didn't it? The real priority in the trauma, as I mentioned before, was self-preservation, survival, personal survival. It was really about creating a future where I never experienced that kind of devastation again, where I never experienced that, disappointment again, that heartbreak, that betrayal. Never again do I want to experience that. That's really what this plan is about. Are you with me? This is a plan for self-preservation and survival to avoid being devastated again. It's a personal plan. It's all about my personal survival. So it becomes selfish. It becomes a product of preoccupation with my trauma. That's why when you see people who have been traumatized and then they come up with this promise and this plan, like the trauma creates desperation. Like people become very desperate to what? To avoid being hurt again. So that you have to get that there's a high level of commitment to this cause, fueled by pain and hurt and desperation. And so when push comes to shove, and and that's what actually starts to happen a lot of times, people start to push and shove each other. Because it's like these scripts get so tight that people can't breathe, they can't be themselves, and they're actually squelching the person's individuation. And actually that trauma and the promise that people have made, to stay away from that trauma, is the exact opposite of really what their heart's desire is. Remember, anybody's heart's desire is a love story. And out of love for the people that we have, we want them to blossom into their own person and to realize their own unique abilities and skills and talents. We want that for people. But you see how that heart's desire challenges the promise I made for personal survival, right? And that's where the clash is. Now, here's the nastiness of it, is that on the surface, what is consciously being declared, being described, is that the actions that the parent is taking is for the good of the family, for the good of the children. Remember, this is all about love and being cared for and feeling happy and all the, like, so on the surface it's, I say, i'm this is all about you. What I do is for you, and I do so much for you, for you, for you. When you lift the lid on that, it's like the Trojan horse. On the outside it looks like a good deal, On the inside, there's something very dangerous afoot. There's something that is not being spoken to, right? It's kind of like the old Trojan horse was supposed to be a gift. And then, the ancient the army was inside the Trojan horse, and they came out at night and took over the kingdom. So this is kind of what's in the shadow. It's in the dark. It's hard to see. On the surface, it's being sold as the plan of happiness, love, etc. But actually it's not. It's a plan that came out of pain and suffering, and it was all about personal survival and self-preservation. And because that was such a hard event for me to experience, I never want to experience that again. So, you know, and this is where parents will say that I never want my kids to have to go through what I went through. That sounds like a great intention, doesn't it? That's the Trojan horse. On the outside, it sounds like a really great intention. But the strategy embedded in it, oh my gosh, will suck the life out of everybody. So I'm going to leave it here because people have asked me to do this video again on trauma promises. All right. So maybe I'll do a part 2, part 3, or if you have some questions, let me know and I will expand on things. But I hope this was helpful. Take care.